Okay, so we live in an increasingly software-mediated world. And by that I mean digital processes shape more and more of how we experience our day-to-day lives. For me, Citymapper and Google Maps are the way I navigate my home city. I can't remember the last journey I made without them. I mean, I still get lost, but it's through Citymapper and Google Maps. I don't think there's anything particularly radical about that statement, so I'm going to just assume that you agree with me. And while I've got you, I'm going to make another assumption that you agree with the thing I'm going to say next, which is that two of the key enablers of this shift to a software-mediated world are cheap computing power, which means we can pack more and more complex software into everyday devices and give us this amazing functionality we enjoy. And the second thing being ubiquitous data. And by that I mean data about everything. So data about ourselves, data about our physical world, data about how we interact with each other. And what this data allows is for these devices to orient themselves in our physical world and to interact with us and with each other. Right? So those are the end of my assumptions. Now I'm actually going to ask you things and get your feedback. So, quick show of hands. How many people think this shift to a software-mediated world is a good thing? Even allowing for the disruption that's happening. Oh, I like this. This is an optimistic audience. Good. Okay. And how many people think the opposite? Ah, good. Okay. So, however you voted, wherever you stand, whatever your position, is a function of two things. Firstly, your susceptibility to peer pressure from your fellow audience members and when they raise their hands. But secondly, and more pertinently for this talk, it's also a function of how you assess value. And that's one of the things I want to talk about today. I want to talk about value in this new software-mediated world and how we think it's going to accrue. And I want to talk about it because how we assess value is a function of a mental calculation we're doing. And it's not done in isolation. It's informed by the conversations that are taking place in broader society. Now, in order to stop this becoming too abstract a conversation, because I also want to talk about conversations and the quality of those conversations, I want to talk about where we think those conversations are going to take us. Do we think they're going to take us to a place where this value that we think, some of us think, exists in this software-mediated world are going to take us to a good place, one in which that value is equitably distributed, or do we think the opposite? Now, to stop this becoming too abstract, I was saying, I would like to ground this wherever possible in economic value. Now, I just want to say, I don't think, I'm not grounding it, anchoring this in economic value because I think it's the only way of measuring value, or even necessarily the most important way. And if I'm really honest, I was a little bit nervous about putting in anything about economic value. But then I thought, hold on, this isn't just any audience, this is a TEDxBrum audience. And you guys are masters of nuance, and you're totally going to get what I'm trying to do. So essentially what I'm saying is, you're the Marks and Spencers of audiences. And those luscious-looking fruits, that's you. So having now shamelessly pandered and just flattered you, I hope you're going to stay with me for the rest of this talk. Okay, so back to value. Where do we think how much value do we think this new world is going to create? Now, there are loads of people willing to hazard a guess, but in reality, we don't know. It's too soon to tell. The jury's still out. But because we're human beings, we never let a small thing like a lack of evidence stop us from speculating wildly and then making bets on the back of that. At the very least, even if we're not trying to predict the future, we are looking to know enough to protect our interests. And if you're a corporation, you're a business trying to make some money, then the primary area of interest is financial. So, I think we can glean a lot of information about where organizations think the value is going to accrue and how they're going to exploit that by the kinds of conversations that they're looking to have with us. And to kind of, work our way through this, I thought I'd pick a few examples. So, Sonos and iRobot. Now, Sonos is a creator of high-end speakers, and they're just gorgeous over there. They're just beautiful. Don't you just want one? And then iRobot create these robotic vacuum cleaners that are able to kind of self-navigate and clean your home automatically. Also really cool. Now, both of these organizations earlier this year did some things that I think are really interesting. So Sonos, following a software update, unilaterally updated its privacy policy. And what it did was give itself more freedom to reuse, to share, to sell some of the behavioral data that the Sonos speakers collect as they go about, piping high-quality music into your homes. And in an interview, the chief operating officer, and this happened separately, these were independent events, but the chief operating officer of iRobot, in an interview, kind of let slip that the company was thinking about how it might also share information about the layout of homes with third parties. And again, this is data that the Roomba collects as it tries to go about your home cleaning. In a completely different sphere, there are, shall we say, more fraught conversations happening between tractor manufacturers, in particular John Deere, and the farmers who buy this high-end farming equipment. And the cause of the tension is John Deere's practice of withholding product information. Now, because these tractors are increasingly software dependent, withholding that information means that many of the owners can't decide and can't just fix their own tractors and can't decide to just take it to an independent repair shop. They have to go via those people that John Deere has shared this product information with. And then a third example I'd like to cite of kind of conversations that are going in this space is in the arena of something that I think is super exciting and is totally enabled by this software-mediated world, and that's self-driving cars. Tesla, obviously, is at the forefront of this. And so just perusing their website, and I came across this quote. I'm just going to read it to you. So, please note also that using a self-driving Tesla for car sharing and ride-hailing for friends and family is fine, but doing so for revenue purposes will only be permissible on the Tesla network, details of which will be released next year. So phew. If you can fork out enough money to buy one of these self-driving cars, you'll be pleased to know that you can use it to ferry family and friends around. That's fine. But if you want to do anything else, say generate revenue from this, then you're going to have a conversation with Tesla. Now, what I think is really interesting about these conversations is what it tells us about how manufacturers are looking to own and control the value-generating hotspots that they think are going to emerge. And how they go about doing that is really, really interesting. Right? Because the means of control, their willingness to enforce this control, and the means of control is software-enabled. Now, what does that mean? It means they get to decide the status of, well, us. They can decide whether we are going to be co-creators, whether they're going to use our data, how they're going to use our data. They will also get to decide whether we are real owners or whether we're just licensees. We're essentially renting this high-end equipment. And if you think a Sonos costs anywhere between 160 and 450 quid, that's an expensive licensee, I think. Same for a Roomba. A Roomba costs what? Upwards of 350 quid? I've done my research. I really want a Roomba. Right? So this isn't cheap. For that, do we just get to be licensees? How do we have this conversation? How do we negotiate? The problem, of course, is that this kind of power imbalance makes for tricky negotiation. I'm just going to pause. Isn't that, I know this is like a life-threatening situation for that mouse. It's okay. The guy who took the picture assured us that he saved the mouse, so you can breathe, don't feel bad. But isn't that just such a beautiful picture? Look. Anyway, okay, so back on point. This power imbalance, I think, is really bad. I think disempowered consumers makes for lazy manufacturers. It stifles innovation. And that's why I think the nature of these conversations is so important and why I think they're worth exploring. Because if we don't get it right, we end up with statements like this. So this was something that a spokesperson for Sonos says, I think when they were under pressure, because usually the spokesperson is someone you wheel out to kind of pour oil on troubled waters, and this seems like a too feisty a statement for that. So anyway, it reads, the customer can choose to acknowledge the policy, this is their updated privacy policy, or can accept that over time, their product may cease to function. If that's not two fingers from a spokesperson, I don't know what is. And this is the challenge, right? Now, you might think, well, you know, don't buy expensive kit. But if this trend continues, if we are indeed moving to an increasingly software-mediated world, and I continue to assert that we are, if that's what we're doing, then actually this trend will continue to more and more sort of low-end products. More and more of our lives are going to be software-mediated. And the power to control that relationship via software means that corporations have more and more power to make us offers that we can't refuse. I just had to get a Godfather quote in there. That's really good. Okay, so having said all this, I don't think these corporations are evil. I think they're trying their hardest to protect value for their shareholders in an increasingly competitive market. I think they're a bit stuck. I'm not sure they know quite how to have this relationship with us in ways that allows for value to be shared. So what can we do? How can we help them and us get unstuck? Well, I think there are a number of things we can do. I think we can start to think about the whole value chain, right? Not just when we buy our devices and it's in our pockets, in our hands, in our homes, but more generally, we can start to think about who owns value, who's controlling it. Now, something really interesting, I think it's really interesting, and I think you should too, is happening in the United States, and it's been labeled the right to repair movement. And essentially, remember those farmers I mentioned earlier, the John Deere farmers? Basically, they got fed up of being locked out of their very expensive possessions. And what they started to do was to lobby their state governments to pass legislation to force these manufacturers to share this information in a standardized way so that repair shops, other than those selected by the manufacturers, could repair them, right? That means sharing this product information more widely. Now, they found common cause with many electronics repair shops, you know, those places you go to when there's something wrong with your tablet or there's something wrong with your laptop or your phone. Because the same practices are beginning to see those practices in all of these other electronics sort of markets as well. Now, there are about 8 states in the United States that are currently considering this type of legislation. And I think that's a conversation we could stand to have here in the UK too. The second thing we can start to do is to demand systems that support more multi-stakeholder control of data. So if you think about systems that we have now, they prioritize the collection of data for the purpose of manufacturers. That information that, you know, the stuff that the Sonos speakers collect or the Roomba collect is optimized for iRobot and for Sonos. Right? No one's really thinking yet about what you might want to use with that data, or how you might choose to share that data, or how other people in this bigger value stream, because this is what it's really about. It's about control and ownership and how we get value from just the benefits of this software-mediated world. No one's yet thinking more broadly than the manufacturers, and I think that's something we can start to do. And I think there are opportunities for us to do that, because we are moving increasingly, and Birmingham's definitely moving, towards becoming a smart city. Now, as that happens, your city, my city of London, is going to be increasingly littered with devices gathering and collecting collecting information, these small pieces loosely joined. So this Internet of Things are going to be creating new value hubs. And I think we can ask the question, who's going to own those hubs, and who's going to control the value that flows through them? And then the last thing I think we can do is just start to be more upfront in asking the economic question. How are you actually going to make money out of this? Because if we think about this mindset that every company has to be a data company, every business has to be a data business, we can see that that's the thinking that's driving this hoovering up of data, this rush to control these value hotspots. We should ask ourselves, are you really going to make money out of this? Because as of 2016, advertising spend in the UK accounted for what? About less than 2% of GDP. And yet, so many businesses will have in their business plans and vision statements about how they're going to generate all this revenue from selling data to advertisers. Really? How many of these data businesses can this industry segment support? And if that data isn't going to be used for sale to advertisers, what's it going to be used for instead? Because this sea of data will get used for something. I started this talk saying, I think we're increasingly moving to a software-mediated world. I assumed you agreed, and I'm on stage and you're not, so you can't say otherwise. I still think that. I still think that we are moving to this software-mediated world, and I think there is so much value, that there's so much potential here. But I think that potential will be so much better realized if as we transition to this world, if we are co-creators, if we are value sharing. And I think the conversations we're having about that will help shape that reality. I hope we can start to have better conversations. Thank you.